Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Nick and Joe Show. I'm Nick. He's Joseph, and he's in Ottawa. I'm in Sioux Lookout, but I am heading down to the valley in the next little while. We're going to leave Thursday. We're going to head down to Ottawa Valley and spend some time with family over the Easter holidays, and then it's who knows what happens after that. Um,
Nick doesn't believe in security. That's why he's broadcasting his movements a week in advance.
I'm not telling what route I'm saying or
But but our bunker, our broadcast bunker in the National Capital Region will remain a secret, ladies
oh,
and
I'm not
gentlemen.
telling me where. I'm not telling anybody where you are.
Right.
Yeah, I'm a moving target. Good luck.
Nick, at 60 years old, you're not necessarily moving fast enough anymore.
Well, let's just say I'm like a three-legged racehorse. I'm putting out lots of energy. I'm just not winning any races, but I am still trying.
Very good.
I told that to somebody at the counter one time, and when you go through a grocery store and then, how are you? Fine. How are you? Fine. How are you? Fine. 4 million times. Then you get some idiot like me walking up and say something like that, and they shake their head and say, "What did you say?" It brightens up their day. Anyway.
Nick, can I just start before we get into these topics,
Yep.
and we'll mention this a few times over the course of the broadcast, but we're going to be moving away from for the Nick and Joe show anyway, moving off of the Blast the Radio platform.
Yep.
So I don't know if you're watching us on Blast the Radio platform, but we're going to be moving off of that platform. So if you want to catch us in the future, make sure you check out the Nick and Joe Show Facebook page. Okay. We are playing there tonight as well. We play there simultaneously, but I just want to make sure, and we'll mention it again a few more times as the broadcast goes on.
Yeah.
So make sure that you check out the Nick and Joe Show Facebook page, or alternatively, you can also catch the Nick and Joe Show because I'm one of the co-hosts. So we are also broadcasting this on my own personal Facebook page, Joseph Benamy. So
Right.
uh, just so bear that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. And as I say, Nick, we'll be mentioning this a few times over the course of the broadcast. So we just want people to know what's happening and to feel comfortable with a smooth transition from one platform to the other, or from one Facebook page to the other.
Yes. Good advice. Good advice. It's some show keeping notes, housekeeping. I think that's what they call it. And yeah, so that way people know we're not going away. We're just changing. We're moving from the living room to the kitchen, kind of thing, something like that, or the other way around. I don't care what analogy you use.
Well, anywhere where we're closer to the food.
See, I like to move to the kitchen for that very reason.
Right.
Yep. 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 Because my wife, what she made another amazing meal for me tonight. It was rice and chicken and just, oh my God, that woman can cook. Anyway, I'm a very fortunate man. Um, all right, why don't we dive into this? The big the You may have heard a rumor or two about the indictment of former President Donald Trump by a district attorney in New York City in the borough of Manhattan, I think. And his name is, I have it here, I wrote it down. Um, oh, come on. I did this on purpose. Where did it
Well,
go?
while Nick is looking up the DA's name,
What it
I
is.
get a point of clarification. It's not really the district attorney that indicts. It's the grand jury, which is
Okay, fair enough. But
it's a
he
group
was
of citizens
convening.
who. Anyway, go on, Nick.
It's Alvin Bragg, is what his
Correct.
name was. And he got elected as district attorney because in the United States they even elect their dog catchers. I'm being a little
in
bit funny, but
in
oh,
some jurisdictions, you're not wrong.
really? That I
Uh,
didn't know.
I'm quite certain. Well, I don't know if they call them dog catcher, but head of animal protective services or
Oh, I was
something
going to
like
say
that.
dog chasers. All right, okay. Some are more successful than others.
Oh dear.
But the point I'm making, though, as much as that's tongue in cheek and just poking a little bit of fun at our American cousins, they elect everybody down there. So you get elected, you run for office like a sheriff. Only you're in the legal profession, but you take a different office than the sheriff does. And his job is to bring evidence to a grand jury seeking an indictment. And that's
Correct.
one of the things that he ran on. It's not the only thing he ran on, but he got elected. Now, when you do that, you can hardly claim impartiality. You've made it political. This Mr. Bragg is a big time hardcore Democrat. Doesn't like Trump at all, never has liked him. And that should be reason enough for him to recuse himself. First of all, this is not the first grand jury to hear the evidence. And the first one came up when it was all done. They said, there's nothing here. What are you doing? So by bringing it back, it's my opinion that they're playing into Donald Trump's hands, because now he can say to the American public, look, I've been telling you for 4 years now, they are persecuting me unfairly. Okay. They've looked at this evidence already. Another grand jury said no. They're bringing it back, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that I cannot get on the ticket to become, or that I won't be on the ticket to run against whoever the Democrats are going to field to run. I don't think Joe Biden's going to be the guy, but even if he is, I'd love to see that debate. But anyway, the point is they're trying everything they can to block Trump from being on that ticket. And they've made it political. Therefore, Trump is just rubbing his hands behind the scenes together in glee, because they're playing right into his strengths. And I think it's a really stupid move from a political point of view, for the Democrats to deal that card. That hand's been played, and it didn't win. So now you're going to go back with the same losing hand. Good luck to them.
Well, that is the political argument for sure, but I think that the situation is far more serious than that, Nick. If I'm looking at this from a purely political point of view, I think that you're quite right about that. Although I've heard some people positing the theory that that in fact the Democrats want to provoke some kind of reaction by Trump supporters that they could then point to and say, you see, we've been saying all along Trump supporters are violent. And I wouldn't discount the possibility of violence, not because it's Trump and not because it's right-wing or conservative, but because, let's face it, the Americans in particular have a history of, from time to time, engaging in some degree of political violence, okay? Remember that there's, let me just think now, 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it's just 4, it might be 5, but 4 for sure, 4 presidents over the course of the history of the United States have been assassinated. That's 4 assassinations, and that's not including the attempted assassinations of different presidents, okay? Right. Which could easily be another 4 or 5. And so it's not usual, but it's far more frequent than I think when you look at the numbers than people are really comfortable with. Okay. And so is this a calculated move to provoke some sort of violence on the part of Trump supporters? I'm not saying it is. I don't necessarily buy into the theory, but it's floating around out there. And if that's the case, it's a very dangerous game that they're playing.
Let me just halt you there for just a second. Sure. There's a comment in the in the comment section. Nicholas is wondering, we're on YouTube, right? We're broadcast on YouTube.
We should be broadcasting on YouTube on the Nick and Joe Show. If you go to YouTube and check out the Nick and Joe Show, it should be live. I believe we are broadcasting live there.
Okay, because he just want to be able to see our ugly mugs. Anyway, About your
Yeah,
comment, though,
don't be careful what you wish for there.
that's right. That's why I said, but going back to your comments about how, presidents have been assassinated and attempts have been made, the one that sticks out most clearly in my mind is the attempt on Ronald Reagan um, back in the 80s. But the point I would make is, in recent history, every time the Democrats have tried to provoke violence from, let's call it, for lack of a better term, the MAGA crowd, it fails. I mean, who burnt Baltimore? It wasn't the Republicans. It wasn't the MAGA crowd. Who was it that set up January 6th? It wasn't the MAGA crowd. Who was it that, and you can run down a list of the last 10 years. And every time the Republicans somebody tries to goad the Republicans into massive acts of violence, such as burning cities, where are the, if nobody's ever thought, where do you see the right-wing cities? And they are out there. People run from run a city, right-wing mayors, right-wing governors. Where are they? Where are those burning police cars? Where are those riots in the streets? They're only in democratically held cities. And I think that's something that the Democrats, this is why I'm saying, is playing right into Trump's hands, because his crowd doesn't get provoked. If they do get provoked, it takes a lot. And so far, it's failed pretty much every time it's tried. I can't think of a time when a Republican-led group was involved in any kind of massive or even any kind of violent situation.
Well, Nick, I just on I take issue with one point that you made. I think it's fair to say that the riot in the U.S. Capitol in Washington D.C. on January 6, 2021, I think it's fair to say that was more or less a group that were supportive of Donald Trump. Now, that's not to say that it was as violent as it's been portrayed. I think that myth has been debunked pretty decisively now, and nor was it really an insurrection to the extent that it was. While it may have been, and I'm using this may have in the minds of some people, been an opportunity to try to slow or interfere with the procedure, the formal ceremonial procedure of counting electoral ballots in the Congress, to take that and to try to portray that as an attempt to subvert democracy writ large, to overthrow the government of the United States, to reverse the results of the election in 2020. That's just a fantastical fantasy Harry Potter presentation of the facts. It's simply an obscene exaggeration of what happened, not justifying it. Okay, but let's.
Well, even if you want to give them that, that's it. What else is there?
Yeah,
And
you're right.
A huge exaggeration.
It's the exception that proves the rule, as the saying goes, right?
Yeah.
So you're not wrong about that, Nick. I quite agree with you. But there are other, I think, very important angles to this whole brewing controversy now that is going to come to a head. And we're going to talk about them when we come back from a very short break. Very short break, ladies and gentlemen. You will not have time to go and refill your drinking glasses. Stay put. We'll be back in just a minute here on the Nick and Joe Show.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
All right, welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show. My name is Nick, and my co-host is Joseph, and we are about 1,200 miles apart. He's in Ottawa, and I'm up in Sioux Lookout. Anyway,
the wonders of modern technology.
I tell you what.
You know, when I started, I've actually never been in the broadcast business per se, Nick. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, Nick and I only know each other from the fact that he used to host a radio talk show here in Ottawa, and he had me on as a guest talking about policy and politics from time to time. So that's how we got to know one another. But the reason I'm saying this, you know, talking about modern technology, but when I first started doing broadcasts, that is to say, interviews, remote interviews on television or radio or anything like that, other than coming into the studio, doing it live with you, because we were in the same city, Nick, just the hoops that we used to have to jump through in order to do a remote interview,
my friend, we thought they'd never end.
You know, like if 5 minutes on CTV or 5 minutes on CBC or whatever, okay, would take hours to prepare, getting down to the studio, doing makeup, blah blah blah, and on and on. Whereas today you could do this kind of thing quite literally from your basement at home. For if you wanted to do it for free, you could do it for free. Your reach might be a little limited, but it doesn't cost much to have an almost global, infinite global reach nowadays. And it's just amazing how quickly and how far the technology has advanced when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Leaps and bounds. And
yeah,
it's only going to get better. Like we're going to move to, on my end, we're going to move to a Skylink system with much better up and down speed, much smaller amounts of latency. So, you know, the show will look sharper, cleaner, and faster. So I'm really looking forward to that. That's something we'll be pursuing in the next little while.
So back to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Just before the break, I mentioned that there are, I think, other more important aspects to this than just the Democrats versus Republicans, Trump versus, you know, the Democrats, the mega crowd versus whomever. Like, all of that stuff is important. But really, for me, the most important thing, and I think one of the really important aspects of this for us outside of the United States, why should we be concerned about this kind of stuff? And that is because we're seeing in America today, and it's playing out in different jurisdictions as well, including here in Canada, but focusing on America today, Nick, we're seeing what I see as a profound deterioration in what I would like to say is the rule of law. And now a lot of people out there that are listening to the show or watching it who may not be on our side of the political spectrum are going to go, damn right, those Trump people, Trump broke the law, etc. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about using the law as a political weapon. That's what they do in third world banana republic dictatorships. Now, interestingly enough, because I know you're a history buff, so there are two presidents that I just want to point to as examples of how this kind of thing should be handled. Okay? The first is President Gerald Ford, who was never elected to the presidency. He did run in '76 and was beaten by what's his name, Jimmy Carter. Ford became president because he was the vice president when Richard Nixon resigned.
That's right.
Now, Richard Nixon was never charged with a crime. There were other members of his staff that were charged with crimes, and some of them went to jail. Richard Nixon himself was never charged with a crime, but even if he had been, it wouldn't have mattered, because Gerald Ford, when he became the prime minister, the president, one of the first things that he did was he pardoned Gerald Ford, or he pardoned Richard Nixon, even though Richard Nixon had not been charged with a crime. So call it, a preemptive pardon. And his reason was very simple. The whole Watergate thing had torn the country apart. And he felt that there was a lot of wisdom in the old saying, you can be right or you can be happy. Meaning you could pursue this because it's maybe there's a crime here, and should the president of the United States be above the law, etc. And all of those are good points to make. Except that sometimes you have to put the peace and security of the country ahead of getting back at the president. And now that's the Gerald Ford story. But let me also illustrate something that happened that also involved Richard Nixon. In 1960, by the way, I'm saying this part of it because just to make sure that everybody understands that I'm perfectly neutral on this. I'm not partisan. This is not me defending Donald Trump, okay? Richard Nixon was the Republican candidate in the 1960 presidential election in the United States. And who won that election? John Kennedy did. That was the election that Kennedy won. And it was widely known that because Kennedy won that election by the skin of his teeth, and it was widely known that he was only able to win it because of electoral cheating that took place in Illinois, in the Chicago precincts under the old Daley administration. Okay, there was a lot of corruption at the time in that place.
The slogan was...
Everybody knew it. Nixon knew it. Kennedy knew it. In fact, Kennedy, in fact, joked about it. Did Richard Nixon challenge the election? Did Richard Nixon make it a huge issue? No. Richard Nixon knew that he had the presidency stolen from him in 1960, but he didn't make an issue of it. He accepted the results, tainted as they may have been, because he felt it was more important not to use this issue to tear the fabric of the country apart, which it could very well have done. So these are two examples of how presidents or potential presidents handled the situation similar to what we find ourselves in today. Gerald Ford was no giant, of politics. We were joking around, I believe last week on the show, that we grew up in an era of political giants. And now we're surrounded by political dweebs, political midgets, and I'm not referring to the little people. So sometimes you have to put the peace and the security and the well-being of the society that you're governing ahead of your particular political interests. And I think that's, in my view, in my judgment, I think that's where Trump made the mistake. I think it was a mistake for him to so vociferously, so aggressively challenge the outcome of the election. Now, I know a lot of people out there on my side of the political equation, our spectrum, are going to say, oh, that's that Benamy again. He's really a closet liberal. On the contrary, ladies and gentlemen, it is a fundamental conservative principle that we sometimes look at the context of our decisions and we refrain from taking action that we may be justified in taking in isolation from everything else. Context is very important. Prudence is very important. Those are very important, crucial, fundamental, conservative principles.
Okay, let me jump in here.
Sure.
First of all, as far as Trump is concerned, you're right. It was a different society, and I'm not excusing anybody of anything here, but let's face facts. Let's look at reality. In the 1960s, the culture was completely different than it was in Donald Trump's time.
True.
Politics, for good or ill, have become a blood sport where it's a theater of one-upmanship, gotchaism, and on and on and on. And especially, and I'm not saying the Republicans don't do this, but the Democrats have made an art form out of it, where if you stand up in opposition to what they want to do, you must be destroyed. They like the swamp. They like the alligators and the snakes that are in it. They've had control of it long enough that now they don't want to let go. And anybody who cares about the country more than they care about their political party would say, I got 2 terms. I'll do what I can and I'll move on. Let somebody else take over. That's not the way these people think. Look at Nancy Pelosi, just as an example. The woman was born before Noah built the ark. I mean, she's not exactly a spring chicken. Okay?
Oh, dear.
I'm just, what is she, in her late 80s? I mean, just now.
As opposed to her late 4000s?
Yes. Well, 80s, it depends if you throw in the square root times the multiplier.
Okay.
Force multiplier. But my point is simple, that politics today is such a brutal place. And you and I have talked about this before, how some of the best people that should be running the country don't want to go there, don't want those jobs, because it's not about public service. And there's not a lot of good people who could do a lot better than the crowd we have on either side of the border. They don't want it because they don't want the rectal exam that comes with it. They don't want every skeleton they got in their closet dragged out and thrown in their face from 30 years ago. And yet on both sides of the border, this is what they have to go through. Okay.
Right. Well, I don't think you're wrong, Nick, in general, but I just want to interject one quick comment, and that is I don't think that that's as new as you're thinking it might be.
Oh, no. But what I'm saying is each generation has its problems. The 60s, yes, politics was probably still very much a blood sport, but it was a different kind of politics. Today, what we have is headhunting and shrunken skullism, where the only way I'm trying to keep this light because first, on one hand, it's funny, but on the other hand, there's so many examples that fit this bill, whether it's Poilievre against Trudeau or whether it's Trump against Bernie Sanders or against Biden. Pick your poison. It's the same thing. In a way, you're right. The more things change, the more they stay the same.
There's a great I think it's HBO series out there called Rome.
Yes.
And I highly recommend it to anybody who wants to see what politics. You want to see politics as a blood sport? Okay, come on.
Et tu, Brutus?
Et tu, Brute?
Is that what the phrase actually says? I thought it was
it's Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, the play.
Stabs him in the back.
That's the Shakespeare play.
That's right.
Right. Beware of the Ides of March. The Ides of March just passed recently, a couple of weeks ago. 15th of March is the Ides of March. I have no idea where that term comes from, by the way, but that's...
I have no idea either. But beware of the Ides of March. And Justin Trudeau went through some pretty rough times recently about all kinds of things, which maybe we'll get into, maybe we won't. But, oh boy. So anyway, as far as Trump is concerned, this is playing right into his hands. I think the DA is making a huge mistake, and he's only going to make, should Trump end up on the ticket, it's going to be, I won't say a landslide because nobody knows, but it's going to be a very interesting election.
it's going to be a very interesting week down south of the border. That's for absolute sure. With the indictment coming, his surrender, and now I see he's going to be making remarks to the nation after he's done
So
with
much
the
for the gag
administrative
order,
things
huh?
on Tuesday, right? So that'll be interesting in itself. Look, we've got to go for a break, Nick. There's never
You
a
just
dull
like that
moment.
shrunken
That's for sure.
headism.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, stick with us. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. You will have time to get up and fill your glass as long as you rush. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Nick and Joe Show. Don't go away.
Ice cream. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Ice cream. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. That strawberry chocolate taste, ice cool vanilla for me. Hundreds and thousands, I need an ice cream island. Give me ice cream with whipped cream, strawberry sauce, and see my face gleam. I need a wafer on top, just ice cream full stop. So take me to the pudding shop. Ice cream, a million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. Ice cream, a million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. That strawberry chocolate taste.
There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look, I think this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look, I think this might.
And we're back.
There we are. I just had to click the right tab, that's all.
Oh, that's okay, Nick. No worries.
I was just checking the score in the Leaf game.
Uh-huh.
And we spotted Detroit 2 goals, so they're up 3-1. So I'm sure they'll come back in the third period. Anyway,
Could be.
they played a great game against Ottawa. 3-0 shutout. Gotta love it. I don't care if they don't beat any other team in the league.
Well, you're trying to bait me, but I'm not an Ottawa Senators fan, as you well know.
True enough. True enough. I know there's a closet Leaf fan under that skull cap somewhere.
No, I'm sorry to say there really isn't.
I'm not done with it yet either. Anyway, all right. Let's see. Okay, we've got a few topics here to pick up with, and I want to move to Canadian politics. And here we have, if you ever wondered why people are frustrated with the Prime Minister, this, I think, is one of the many reasons. According to the Epoch Times, Trudeau defends the appointment of cabinet minister's sister-in-law as interim ethics commissioner. All right, let me share with you. Thought I highlighted it. Where'd you go? Let's see. Anyway,
So the Prime Minister of Canada has appointed the sister-in-law
yes,
of Dominic LeBlanc, who
That's
is not just a member of the governing party, he's also a member of the cabinet. He's a minister of the crown. And the prime minister has appointed that is to say Lemblon's sister-in-law as interim ethics commissioner. And and you can't make this stuff up. It's bad enough, Nick, that the prime minister is appointing the sister-in-law of a cabinet minister to any kind of an oversight position, parliamentary position, okay, when backbench MPs can't hire any relatives just to work as staff in their offices, okay? The rules prohibit them from doing that. But it's, almost, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. It's
Well,
that
it's rules.
when it comes down to it, this prime minister and this government, with this kind of appointment, are becoming a parody of themselves.
It's a classic example of a set of rules for you and a set of rules for me.
But the imagine the temerity of these people, the utter chutzpah. It's not just that he's appointed somebody to a position that ought not to be able to serve in that position because of her relationship with the cabinet minister, but it's the ethics commissioner, the very office
It is.
that is charged with investigating conflict of interest allegations and enforcing conflict of interest rules.
Do you realize this could very well been a Monty Python skit? Remember Minister of Silly Walks? And just like this is Monty Python, that group of brilliant comics could not have come up with this. This is another analogy would be this is like Mr. Bean. I mean, or Yes Minister.
It's a Saturday
all
Night Live skit
Begging
that
to
writes
be done.
itself.
My God. But you know something, on one hand, and it is funny, there's no doubt about it, but at the same time, you're right, the arrogance of these people is mind-blowing. Like, no one should have to think that who is in the position that he's in should ever let that thought even cross his mind, never mind act on it. This is so obviously a conflict of interest. This is so obviously putting in place somebody who will never find you guilty for an ethics violation again. I mean, this is why it just blows my mind. Our people, and here's another, and I think you mentioned this in the pre-show. What really matters here is we get mad and throw stones and smash the TV and all that stuff at these politicians for the different things that they do.
Well, you do, Nick.
Well, I do that. Yes, I've got about 4 extra monitors over there in case I put my fist through this one. But the point is that we're the problem. And by we, I mean the royal we. Canadians are the problem. I have been saying for years that if you hire somebody to represent you at any level of government, and I'm thinking of Dalton McGuinty here and his "I will not raise your taxes, but I will not cut them either" promise. That's famous. That should go down in the world of infamy, right there with, well, maybe not with Pearl Harbor, but you know what I mean, from a political point of view. If someone you elect lies to you, don't vote for them again. Fire them. And yet we don't. We elect them again because they come out selling snake oil and look at all the money we're going to bring. Are we that dumb? Really? Are we that gullible?
Well, apparently so. Nick, and you're quite right. We did talk about this during our pre-broadcast meeting, and one of the things that I pointed out, ladies and gentlemen, is over the past few weeks, when you look at in France, the riots in France over the government's proposals to increase raise the age of retirement. I mean, perished the thought that, people are living 20 years longer than they did when they first had
When
these
Otto von
pension
Bismarck brought it
things.
out.
Somebody's got to pay for it. So along comes the government and says, maybe we should just raise the retirement age by, I don't know, 6 months or something like that. I don't know what the,
And
I'm
France
just,
Burns.
whatever it was. And they're setting fire to the city. Okay. And then look at Israel, where the government that was just elected comes across and says, well, we're going to do some judicial reform here that's badly needed in that country, by the way. And they have hundreds of thousands of protesters in the streets over it. I I'm I cannot find the words that adequately describe the what's the word, Nick? How
Passivity?
unengaged the population is here in Canada.
Apathy is the word you're looking for.
Apathetical, I guess. That the government can do this, and there's no public protest. Some of the media have picked up on this, and they're poking a little bit of fun. Okay, they've pointed at, this isn't proper and stuff like that, which is all true. But where are the public protests? Where's the outrage?
Okay, now let me play devil's advocate. If you are someone who would be, let's say, prone to protest, when you feel that there's been a major violation of charter rights or whatever your issue is, after January a year ago, and what happened there, now there's two sides to this. First of all, how many people now want to go out and protest knowing they may be targeted by their own government, have their bank accounts seized and their property taken from them? So because that's what happened in the truckers' protest. Okay.
Right.
And you, on the other side of the coin, what government, I don't think even Trudeau would have the cojones to pull that stunt again if 50,000 Canadians showed up on Parliament Hill.
Well, and that to me is precisely the issue. The issue is that the government can get away with attacking protesters in the manner that this government did by invoking the Emergencies Act, in my judgment, unlawfully. And we haven't had that discussion yet, Nick, and perhaps we should at some point in time. I think that the inquiry and the report of the inquiry was a complete whitewash.
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'm shocked that what is clearly in black and white spelled out in the legislation enabling the invocation of the Emergencies Act, the criteria that has to be satisfied before you can invoke that act and take extraordinary measures against protesters in this case, was nowhere near satisfied. And how it is that a commissioner who is supposed to be nonpartisan, impartial, can look at the evidence, look at what was going on there, even in the worst possible light, and reach the conclusion that the clearly black and white spelled out criteria was satisfied is beyond me. But again, nobody seems to care.
Well, see, what should have happened, and maybe this is a day late and a dollar short, but what should have happened after the protest was crushed was that there should have been a bigger protest right on its heels. And every time the government comes out and tries that, the protests get bigger. Until the government gets the message, we will not stand for this. If you try to, I'm going to steal a line out of Star Wars, the first movie, where Princess Leia is a prisoner of the Federation, and she's standing before the captain of the starship she's been taken by, and she says, "The harder you squeeze, the more of it slip through your fingers." And I think that is an absolutely correct response to this kind of government overreach, largesse, call it whatever you, trampling of our very fundamental rights. But Canadians, they don't seem to want to go down that road.
Let's take a. This is an important topic, Nick. Let's get back into it. Let's take a very short break, 30-second commercial break, ladies and gentlemen. Don't go away. We're going to be back on the other side of this. We'll pick up this discussion. Very important discussion when we come back. Stay tuned.
Who says you can't turn the clock back? Experience the excitement of open-air flying and see Canada's national capital region like you've never seen it before from the open cockpit of a vintage 1930s biplane. Are you up for the adventure? Put on your helmet and goggles and strap yourself in. Book your flight today. Go to OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. That's OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. Ottawa Biplane Adventures, the adventure begins here.
Oh my gosh, that was so exciting! I gotta do it again.
Here we are, back again.
I always take it. I always get caught thinking we have more time than we do. That's a quick break.
It's 30-second commercial break.
And you would think I'd be able to count to 30. Anyway,
It's not a problem, Nick.
even without
Look,
taking my socks off.
But look, listen. I want to just tie this. Getting back to the comments you were making, Nick. I do think that it was a lot easier for the government to take the action that it took, and to continue to take actions and to behave in ways that I consider to be unethical,
Right.
because they get away with it. And Canadians are just not interested in protesting the malfeasance of the government that happens to be in power at whatever point in time. And this is not an anti-Trudeau or anti-Liberal government diatribe here. You can make the same accusation with respect to the conservative governments. The fact is that Canadians are fundamentally disengaged from the goings-on of the governments that are elected once they're elected. And that's a very dangerous situation because they get to do whatever they want to do, basically. And
let me ask
you're going
you
to
a
have
question.
some people, some voices of protest are going to be raised, for sure, but nothing that is going to compel the government to back down, back away. You're going too far, and it's time for you to just take a few steps back and stop being a bully.
Let me ask you this question. How much do you think geography played a role in A, the first protest, and B, any follow-up? Because remember the logistics of getting the convoy here in the first place. They came from all points of the compass. Well, 3 out of 4 anyway. I don't know how many came from up north. But I guess from my point of view, none, because everybody else was leaving south to go down there. But they came from all over the country. And it took a Herculean effort because of the vastness of the country. I'm not making excuses. I'm just wondering how much of a role this plays. So now when you consider having another even larger protest, you have a problem with geography. You have a problem with ego, because who wants to run this? Who wants to be the face of this organization? And I'm not saying no one does. I'm saying there's a lot of people that do, and there's internal fighting about who's actually in charge. We saw that happen in this last protest. It could be reasonably said it was difficult to figure out who to go talk to, who spoke for everybody there. It wasn't like you had a spokesman. There were a bunch of them, and nobody knew who really was pulling the strings. So with that going forward, for Canada, because of its geographical size, to pull together, this is what makes last January so remarkable. It pulled together people from all across the country. I've never seen that before. Not even the protest in Montreal about the referendum had that kind of an impact and came from that many corners of the country. But going forward, I think that's a huge impediment. And I don't like saying this. I want people to stand up for their rights, but the geography works against us in this place. And I think they count on that on Parliament Hill. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but let's face it, gas is, and they're causing the gas to be so high. You take a tractor trailer or any piece of equipment at all and drive it across the country, it's going to cost you a small fortune. And most people don't have that kind of money. Not for that.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't dismiss the factors that you're raising, Nick, but there's there's plenty of opportunity for larger demonstrations when the weather is better. You can
Well,
have demonstrations in and protests in various geographical locations, and indeed, that was the case around the Freedom Convoy
yes.
series of protests. Is probably the better way to describe what was going on at the
It's
time.
Alberta, Windsor. Yeah, I get it.
So it is, and there's no question in my judgment. Okay, I think that there's very little question that these protests had an impact. If nothing else, what happened was so disruptive, at least in the minds of Canadians and in the minds of government, was had the appearance of being so disruptive that it had the effect of discouraging sitting governments of all political persuasions from reimposing restrictions on the population when the so-called scientists were sounding the alarm about another COVID wave, etc. And interestingly enough, we didn't have any more of these restrictions. There were no more stay-at-home orders. Mask mandates were removed,
Yeah,
began to
I
be
don't.
removed shortly after the convoy was broken up,
I'm not.
and the governments were beginning now to relax the whole idea of having mandated vaccinations,
I don't
etc.
mean to say or give the impression that I don't think there were any good fruit that came from this.
Right,
Okay,
but
that's
it's
not what I'm saying.
no, of course not. But I'm merely pointing out, Nick, that in fact I'm supporting the point that you're making, and I'm saying that indeed, when you do have protests, when the government finally, you have to say to the government, that's it, you've gone too far, and we're pushing back. Uh, you can have an impact. You really can, and I think that that's what happened here. And so what I'm basically saying is that from time to time, this isn't a blanket endorsement. I don't think we should be taking to the streets on every little issue.
No, I'm
But
not
from
saying that either.
but from time to time, when something is big enough, okay, I think that you have to sometimes say, all right, we don't have to be violent, but we have to pull together, and we have to take action. We have to take to the streets and protest. And for whatever reason, we don't do that here in Canada.
No, no, and you know what? That's I would have been kind of proud of that. Even when we protest, not very often do you see any level of violence at a protest. There are exceptions to that. Caledonia, Oka, although Oka, there wasn't any real violence till the last day or so, and it wasn't much. And I'm not trivializing it. I'm just saying that compared to other regions of the world where there are violent, where there are, massive protests, uh, we don't. It's just not within our nature to be violent at a protest. There's
Okay,
fisticuffs and there's stuff like that, but you don't see burning police cars. You don't see buildings torched or trashed. That kind of stuff. It's not. That's not who we are as a country.
which is
I've always taken
perfectly
pride in
fair,
that.
and kudos to Canadians for taking that attitude. But there
Agreed.
was no violence in this protest last winter.
Well,
Um,
except
uh,
for the lady get run over by a horse.
yeah, yeah, that's true.
But if that's even with that said, if that's the worst you can point to, it does say a lot about our character as people. Except for maybe the guy riding the horse, but that's a different story.
And of
Anyway,
course that was a law enforcement official.
that's yes, I believe it's Toronto Mounted Division was responsible for that,
Yeah,
and
I
I might be
don't.
wrong.
I don't know, Nick. I truly do not know. I don't I don't know why our if we don't have to be we don't have to be violent to take over the streets, and the convoy here in Ottawa in January and February of 2022 is a perfect example of that, notwithstanding the fact that it continues to be portrayed in the popular media and in government circles as having been some kind of violent extremist
Yeah, it's a load of
group
crap.
or groups, and that was just fundamentally not the case.
Well,
And that itself is extremely troubling. Is how easily Canadians were able to be anesthetized almost by the government's preemptive characterization of protesters as being these, extremist, dangerous right wingers, misogynists, homophobic Neanderthals. Okay, I mean, whatever the designation was, that if you could make it sound negative, it was
they
attached to this group.
used it.
And the group that really fell down on the job here, the group that really fell down on the job, Nick, was the media.
No question.
Because there were reporters on the ground who knew that what the government was saying was wrong, and
And they
yet
never
they
called them on
continued
it.
to parrot the government line.
Yeah.
It's that more than the government invoking the Emergencies Act should be troubling to Canadians. And I don't know what the answer to that is, my friends. I really don't. But that's if you're asking me what the real fundamental story was around that whole series of events, that's it right there. The abdication of journalists covering the story. And I'm not talking about journalists on the other side of the country who were merely reporting what they were reading from other news reports. That's a problem in itself. But journalists who were on the ground, who
We had more
knew
coverage of that event out of the United States than we did in Canada.
it's unforgivable
Yeah.
that mainstream media had reporters on the ground who were parroting what they had to know was untrue government information.
I wonder how much. Well, okay. You know what? I'm in no position to argue with that. I don't want it because you're right. But when you have to go outside your own country, and I don't mean just I'm not talking about just Fox News. This was covered all over the world.
Yes.
But yet at home, our own homegrown media are guilty of the very charge you lay at their feet. Why is that? Well, that's a good question. What do we do about it?
I don't know, but if you want my view, I think that journalism as a profession in this country is dead. There are a
Well,
lot of people that make money in the journalism industry. They get
on
paid.
the other hand, Joseph, just I'm watching the clock here. There are some new forms of journalism that are popping up, podcasts like ours. I've
Sure.
watched about 3 or 4 different conservative podcasts based in Canada who are doing excellent work covering what's going on in the mainstream. And this is, if that's what you mean by dying, I agree with you. I think that mainstream media as we know it today is definitely dying, but nature abhors a vacuum. And it's going to be filled, the space left by that body as it rots will be filled by people like you and I and other people of the same mindset going, we're tired of being ignored. That's why we do this show, is because we want to have a conservative voice in the marketplace. And we have to have, there's plenty of room for other people to do the same thing. And there's no reason we couldn't collaborate. And this is something that's growing. People are learning how to do this stuff. And there's been some very interesting success stories out there that are filling that void. And people are turning more and more often to YouTube and to vloggers and people like you and me to get at least I won't say completely unbalanced and completely unbiased reporting. That's a fallacy. There's no such thing. but they want to hear the other side. And I think that's where you and I come in. And I think that's where a lot of these other folks come in as well.
Okay, 2-minute break. Get up, stretch your legs, go fill up your glass again. But, well, it depends on how big the glass is. We don't want it to be too full if it's going to...
Someday I'll show you my new beer stein that I... See,
well,
that's
another
what-
glass of... Another
It's
8-ounce
twice that
glass of
size.
beer is fine, but an 8-ounce glass of vodka, I don't know, guys. I would wait until after the show is done. Okay, we're getting into the weeds here.
All right.
Let's we'll be back. We'll be
We'll be
back in
back
a
in a
couple of
minute.
minutes here on the Nick and Joe Show. Do not go away.
All right. All right. Thank you for sticking with us, folks. Next hour straight ahead, we have, let's see. Okay, Joseph, let's do this one. Let's move over to the Ukraine. Now, you
the
brought this story to
Ukraine.
my, sorry?
The Ukraine.
The Ukraine. You brought this story to my attention. I wasn't aware of this, so I'm glad you did, because this is quite the story. So why don't you let people in on what's going on, and then we'll talk about it.
Sure. So apparently, the head, one of the heads, the metropolitan of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Metropolitan Pavel, sorry, I was just reading the notes here on my computer, is the abbot of the Kiev Pechersk Lavro Monastery, which is Ukraine's most revered Orthodox site. And he has been charged criminally, because apparently it's a criminal offense, for having allegedly supported or being supportive, speaking supportively, of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. And of course, that is a criminal offense in Ukraine now. And so he was arrested by the security services. And of course, he denies all of these accusations. And he is now under house arrest in Kiev. And this whole thing really apparently is stemming not so much from the belief that he is pro-Russian, but rather that there seems to be some kind of a dispute over whether or not the monks can continue to occupy the monastery. I don't really understand how the government has become involved in this particular dispute, but what the church now is saying is that the government, the Zelensky government, is using these trumped up charges in order to provide more ammunition to force the monks to vacate the premises. And I guess why this sort of popped up for me is because it's an example, and I think it's an important example, Nick, of the character of the what we're talking about when it comes to the Ukraine. There seems to be a misapprehension that the Ukraine is somehow or other this model of democracy and human rights, and it really isn't. And it's we've talked about this before.
Yep.
By no stretch of the imagination do I support what the Russians have done or are doing. But I am questioning why we in the West are allowing ourselves to become so deeply pulled into this conflict in order to defend a country which is not a NATO ally. It's a backyard country to the Russians. The Russians shouldn't be doing what they're doing, but Ron DeSantis gave an interview a couple of weeks ago where he characterized at least the original dispute between the Russians and the Ukrainians as a quote-unquote border dispute. And
Right.
he wasn't entirely wrong about that. And I'm not just talking here because I've heard this or I've read it somewhere or whatever. I actually have relatives by marriage who are living and working in the border area between Russia and the Ukraine that has been the center of dispute for a number of years now. So I'm pretty familiar with some of the goings on that were happening there. And again, this is just another example of the character, without justifying anything that the Russians have done or are doing. But I think it's important for us to understand and to know the character of the regime that we are defending, and getting closer and closer to having to actually put the lives of Canadian servicemen and women on the line in defense of. That's my big concern. So,
To me, and again, there's obviously a lot more to this story that we are not privy to. There always is. What I'm trying to figure out here is exactly how much of this is nothing more than just a land grab by the state trying to take away property that they don't have jurisdiction over. Now, I don't know what the ground game is in Ukraine, and I don't pretend to. When it comes to internal Ukrainian politics, like I know in Canada, churches are tax free. They're supposed to be safe havens. There's a lot of things that go with being not only just a building, but being a religious organization. There's strengths and weaknesses to it, and I don't know what they are in Ukraine. So with that as a backdrop, as a caveat, to me it sounds like there is something either on or around the property that these monks are in habitation of or living on, that the Ukrainian government either needs or wants. And maybe I'm wrong, but this has all the hallmarks of a classic land battle. Where the state wants something, they don't want to pay for it, and they're going to go and take it, but they don't have the legal authority to do it. So they try these third world tactics of drumming up charges and then confiscated it under some kind of false legal pretense. Um, Maybe that's what's going on here. It certainly seems that way. So we'll have to see exactly how all that plays out. But I know in Canada, especially when I was doing a lot of work with land grant patents, people didn't understand what their rights were. And a lot of times, municipalities, especially, would simply, by decree, make land unusable for the landowner, therefore worthless, and end up, it would be under their control. Is that going on here? Maybe. It could be as simple as that, but I have a feeling that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes here that we're just not privy to. So it makes it hard to actually, you know, project any kind of conversation. Although it does speak to the character of the leader of a country who is busy fending off it. Look at it this way. It's like two kids fighting over a room in a castle while the invaders are pouring through the palisade or pouring over the walls. Which one's more important? Would you know, where would you put your efforts? Well, repelling the invader. You can deal with the other one later if there really is some kind of legal issue here. But when Zelensky takes this fight on in the midst of fighting to the death struggle with Russia, why is he wasting his time with this? What's going on? That's the kind of thing that's how my mind sees it anyway.
Well, Nick, I hesitate to ascribe to this, as in most cases, the some sort of a conspiracy aspect. I don't know that that's the case, and I'm always very reluctant to attribute to conspiracy what is just bad judgment or just foolishness. I think what you're seeing here is a manifestation, an indication of the character of the Zelensky regime. Now, I don't have a dog in the hunt. I don't have a horse in the race, or whatever metaphor you want to use. So I am not criticizing the government of the Ukraine. This is a domestic dispute, and they're going to have to handle it themselves one way or the other. I'm not comfortable to the degree that it's any of my business with what I see happening, and perhaps there are many other aspects to this going on behind closed doors, behind the scenes, that we're not privy to, and we just don't have all of the information. And I think that's a really healthy position to take when it comes to these kinds of things. Let's not make the assumption that we know everything that's going on, all right? But as you say, with that caveat, I think that it's pretty clear that we're dealing with a government that is not, it's not a liberal, small L liberal democracy like we might be used to, or what we are used to defending with our allies in NATO. So why we've become so deeply involved in this particular conflict is, it's as I said, it's frankly, it's beyond me, and I don't believe. I'm one of those people that thinks that we should, right from the word go, have said to the Ukrainians, look, this is a dispute between you and Russia. We don't see this as being our interests in respect of NATO and the NATO alliance being engaged here. When you contact us and you say, we want our country to become part of NATO, the answer should have been right up front, very clearly, no. It's an unnecessary provocation. No, you didn't have to make that as a full-page advertisement in the New York Times. It could have been done behind closed doors, but the answer should have been no. And as for whatever's going on between you and Russia, you're going to have to sort that out. And if there's something that we can do, whether it's Canada or the United States or any other Western country, if there's something that we could do in order to facilitate some sort of a settlement of this ongoing border conflict, then we're prepared to do that. But we're not prepared to allow ourselves to be pulled into this. Why? because the ramifications of being pulled into this, the consequences are potentially too terrible to contemplate. Are we
Right.
going to risk nuclear war over a border dispute between the Russians and the Ukrainians? I just don't think that that's right. And we have to go for a short break.
We
So
do.
let's pick the conversation up again when we come back.
All right, fair enough.
60 seconds. You don't have time to fill your glass this time. So just stay put, and we'll be back after this quick commercial break.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
Here we are. There's
We are
Nick.
back.
Nick.
I
There's
guess
Nick.
you're. I'm just thinking about this whole Ukrainian thing from a NATO point of view. I'm not sure how this is going to end, because on one hand you have this, and let's take DeSantis as being correct that it is a border war between Ukraine and Russia, and you're correct that we should have told them no, you can't join NATO, and here's why, and done a good job diplomatically. First of all, this is a sign of weak leadership by the West. They didn't have somebody with not only the foresight but the spine to be able to stand up to Zelensky and say, look, man, I feel for you, but there's nothing we can do. You know, we'll give you moral support, maybe some humanitarian aid or something like that, but boots on the ground, hardware, ammunition, I'm sorry, you're going to have to. And maybe that would have compelled an end to the war much sooner. And I'm not defending Russia either. I don't want. I'll try. I'll try to. I don't want to be seen as a Russian sympathizer. Russia came over the border with guns blazing. That makes them the bad guy. I've said that from day one. But at the same time, you're right about the fact that the Ukraine is hardly some shining model of democracy for the rest of the world. Zelensky is painting that picture. He's doing his best, but don't forget the guy's an actor. Okay, although so was Ronald Reagan, but that's a different story. When you're talking about this, he's gone to the West, say, help, help, help. And when you look at the country he was in charge of, it was known for black market weapons, drugs, money laundering, all kinds of really, really horrible things. And yes, you could say the West played a role in that, but if he cared about his country more than he cared about his pocketbook, and I'm not alluding by that I'm talking about a national pocketbook here, not his own personal pocketbook, but what happens now is you have a situation where they're making money on these black market exchanges. He doesn't seem to care about the country he's running until it suits him. And that's why there's something, I've always said this, there's something that feels really greasy about this particular conflict. And from Putin's point of view, he's really been painted into a corner, whether it's NATO helping out Ukraine, whether it's the World Court issuing an arrest warrant, which they'll never exercise, but they issued it anyway. We'll have to see how that plays out, because they keep pushing him into a smaller corner. And after a little while, he's going to have to ask himself, what do I lose by pressing that red button?
Yeah, I don't anticipate him doing that. So I feel fairly confident that, they're not really insane over there. Of course, one never knows. The thing about the using nuclear weapons in Ukraine is that the prevailing winds in that part of the world run west to east. So, any kind of nuclear fallout in the Ukraine ends up contaminating and hurting Russians themselves. So there are a lot of reasons why I just don't anticipate the Russians allowing this to go nuclear. That said, I think, again, going back to whether or not we should have left the Ukrainians and the Russians with the impression that the door was open to Ukrainian membership in NATO.
Yeah.
I think that was a terrible mistake. And, we've often said this on our show, Nick, is the importance of having some understanding of history and looking at some of the lessons that we've learned in the past. And all I could do is turn the page back to 1956 with the
Cuban
revolution in
Oh,
Hungary,
in Hungary.
that the Russians crushed, and we were very sympathetic to the Hungarians.
Hungarians.
We opened our doors to Hungarian refugees, people who managed to escape the country at that time that didn't want to return, and a lot of these people settled here and became very productive members of our society. And then move forward to 1968. Same thing with in Czechoslovakia. And look, we could have intervened in those affairs at that time. But again, you have to be, when you're a statesman, and I don't know what the gender neutral term is for statesman, okay? So I'm just going to use that.
That's about as gender neutral as you need to be.
Okay, but people know what I'm referring to here. But when you're a
Right.
statesman, when you have to deal with the affairs of state, you have to look at the context of your decisions. And sometimes principle means the principle of maintaining the peace, or perhaps more accurately, not taking steps that are going to exacerbate the situation and lead to a deterioration of the peace and an escalation of whatever the conflict or confrontation is. So the reality in the real world is that sometimes you have to choose between the lesser of two evils, and I regret that we find ourselves in this situation, because I don't have any reason to criticize Ukraine. I'm not doing that. When it comes to the relationship between the Russians and the Ukrainians and where things stand now in terms of this conflict, I come down squarely on the side of the Ukrainians. I think what the Russians have done have been appalling, and certainly I don't support them. But that doesn't mean that we are sufficiently engaged as to justify the possibility of us going to war over this conflict between the Ukraine and Russia. It's absurd.
You're right. You're right. Look, I don't know what more we can say about it. First of all, we don't have, from a Canadian point of view, we basically denuded the military in order to support Ukraine. Now, I'm not talking about conspiracies here. I'm not talking about nefarious intent, but I'm just looking at the consequences. What happens if we have another crisis break out somewhere? They wanted us to go down to Haiti and invade the country, and who was it? Joe Biden wanted that? Somebody wanted us to go down and take over the island of Haiti, or the island, half of the island, the other half's the Dominican Republic, but take that half of the island and assert control over it, impose martial law. Do what we did after the fall of German, the end of the Second World War in Europe and in Japan. Are you kidding me? We can't even defend our own borders, never mind go and help somebody else put a clamp on what's going on down there. So, but let's say that was within our interests, because it's a lot more in our backyard than it is in Ukraine. We can't do it anyway. All we sent everything we had, and it amounts to everything we could spare, and it amounts to a token. A token. What was it?
For-
8 tanks, 12 tanks we sent over? It's crazy. And there was a little more than that. They sent air defense, local air defense missiles over, and the launchers for them that the Canadian Army's been asking for a decade, couldn't get, and all of a sudden, poop, there they are, gone to Ukraine.
Yeah, you and I, taxpayers, bought this whole defense system, air defense system. We've been denied that our own servicemen and women have been denied, even though they've been asking for this for years. It's kind of like a monopoly, right? Go straight to jail, do not pass go, or whatever, however the term is. It just straight to Ukraine. We purchased them, and didn't even, as far as I know, none of the equipment even passed through Canada.
Yeah, it's not like we at least got to look at it. We just bought it and sent it. It's like drop shipping, from some manufacturer somewhere. We never see it.
Yeah, we just paid the bill.
Yeah, all we had got to do was write the check. Yeah, fat lot of good that does. But
Yeah,
so in other
no,
words,
we haven't written the check yet. We just put it on the credit card.
fair enough. So our grandkids are going to pay that check or pay that bill. But this is what, look, I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but what Canada has done to its military in the last 5 to 10 years breaks my heart. When I look at what they've done to the Navy, what I'm seeing, some of the new recruiting drives, although the Navy has come out with a new one I don't have time to get into that I think is rather interesting. But just they've taken the heart out of it through either selling weapon systems that the Canadian Army's been begging for. What kind of impact does that have on the morale of, the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry or the Dragoons and their tanks? When they know if they go into a conflict, they got to depend on somebody else to provide air defense. That eats at you. If you can't look after yourself and you have to always be asking, it's as bad as asking the Americans for ammunition when we first went into Afghanistan because we didn't have any 50 caliber sniper ammunition. You remember that? And we wore green uniforms. We had to borrow brown, the desert tan. This has been going on for so long that the new ships we're getting. I've mentioned this before.
Nick, don't forget the ice storm in 1998 where we had to have trucks coming up from Fort Drum in New York State because our reserves were mobilized to help find people who were stranded out in the boondocks without power in the middle of January, couldn't have transportation.
Right. So there's plenty of examples to underscore my point. And this is why, oh, good Lord, we could do 2 hours on this. This to me, from someone, I don't want to say, I call myself a peacetime vet. I've never been shot at, that kind of thing. But from a former member, this really breaks my heart. Because when you and I were in, yes, the equipment was old, but we brought something to the table. And we were the best in the world at it. They can't say that anymore.
Well, look, getting back to the Ukraine. I think that what the government here is doing against the church, and I suspect that this is the tip of the iceberg. I cannot, in good conscience, complain about the government here in Canada restricting church services during the COVID epidemic, so-called epidemic, without at the same time making mention of what seems to be happening in the Ukraine. And I think that we have an opportunity and even an obligation to say to the Ukrainian government, you know what, knock that off, okay? You cannot persecute, you cannot attack religious institutions. There's just no justification for it.
Yeah.
Not that I've seen in any of the reports that have come out of Ukraine with respect to this particular event, the arrest of the metropolitan of Kiev. It's wrong. It shouldn't be tolerated, and the Ukrainian government should back off. Have to go for another break, Nick.
Yep.
Okay, so this is again 2 minutes, a little bit more than 2 minutes. So get up, stretch your legs, refresh your drink or whatever if you're having a nice cold drink, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Nick and Joe Show.
All right. Last half hour straight ahead. And I think we've kind of milked Ukraine for all it's worth, at least for tonight's show. That's always an ongoing, you can always go fall back on that topic. There's no end in sight of the bloodshed and the carnage over there. But I thought we'd change gears and come back to North America. For those of you who don't know, if you've been living under a rock, a few weeks ago, a guy by the name of Ivan Provorov, who is the defenseman for the Philadelphia Flyers, decided that he would not wear the warm-up jersey, the rainbow jersey, before a game in the NHL. Now, he started something, and I think there's more to this than meets the eye. I've been giving this a lot of thought. There are now 5 teams which no longer are going to insist that their players wear the rainbow warm-up jerseys. Now, they're still having different events to promote pride and all that sort of thing. It's not that they've completely given up on it, but they are now considering dropping the whole pregame warm-up sweater thing across the NHL totally. The teams that are no longer participating at the moment are the New York Rangers, the Minnesota Wild, the Colorado Avalanche, the New York Islanders, and the Tampa Bay Lightning. There's also other members of other teams, I believe the LA Kings. There's several teams around the league where individual players have said, nope, not going to do it. And it's not that they're casting dispersions on people who uh, live that particular lifestyle, but they recognize something I think most people with a brain in their head understand. Hockey is a sport. It is not politics. It is not a political agenda. When people go to watch a hockey game, they go for the same reasons you and I go to see a movie. Okay. It's called entertainment. So when you sit in the bleachers, all right, and this happens, a lot of people feel like it's being forced down their throat. Think of the players who feel compelled to wear the jersey. If you have to compel somebody to do something and it's not voluntary, if the team doesn't have a vote and say, hey, let's wear these sweaters so we can show we support this, that's one thing. But team management is saying, you will wear these jerseys. And people are beginning to stand up and say, no, we won't. It's got nothing to do with any judgment on any kind of particular lifestyle, but it is indicative of a pushback within North American culture that has said, we've gone far enough with this. We have been tolerant long enough of this. We don't want it in our sporting events. We don't want it shoved in our faces. When we go to something like this, whether it be a hockey game, baseball game, football game, Olympics, whatever it is, we just want to be entertaining. We frankly don't care about the sexual choices people make in their private lives. So that's what I think is going on here. I think you're seeing a much deeper, more profound movement. You're just seeing the tip of the iceberg in the NHL. It goes far deeper than that.
Well, a couple of things, Nick. The first thing is, I believe in Pierre Trudeau's maxim that the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation.
Absolutely.
And I think that if I could use the term, that's a bit of a double-edged sword, because not only does it mean that the state has no business interfering in what people are doing sexually in their bedrooms in the privacy of their homes, at the same time, the rest of us don't want to know. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking homosexual, heterosexual, metrosexual, I don't care, whatever sexual. Basic decency demands that, we basically say, leave it at home, guys, leave it at home. So I don't want, it's not a question of shoving anything down my throat. To me, it's just so undignified to feel that we have to make everything about sex, and that's just my personal view. And maybe it's a little naive, maybe it's not even very sophisticated, but that's the way I feel personally. And I feel this way about heterosexuality as well. I'm not in favor of pornographic love scenes, graphic, realistic. Sexual intercourse scenes in movies. I just don't think that they make any kind of they don't enhance the film. They don't add to the story or to the plot or anything like that. I don't have to have that put in front of me. People have the right to not be exposed to what used to be called indecency. Okay.
Right.
And indecent doesn't mean that the act is wrong. It just means it's private. Keep
It's
it private.
inappropriate for the setting.
It's not something for in the public setting. So a lot of, I think, the conflict around this particular issue, I think is really, it's largely the result of the de-dignification, if you will, and the publicization, if you will, of sex. Okay, so that's one aspect of it, and I think that why the NHL would feel that they've got to get involved in this, I just don't know, and I don't want it, and that's it. And again, I'm not making a judgment on people's sexual practices or anything like that. Now, having said that, there's another aspect to this whole thing as well that I think is important, and it's far more tricky, and that is that you have people working in corporations, you have people who are playing hockey, sports teams, things like that. You have people in school, you have people everywhere who are committed to a particular religious point of view. They may be committed Christians, they may be committed Muslims, they may be committed Jews, whatever the religion is, okay? The fact is, like it or not, uncomfortable as it may make some people feel, these religions have boundaries on sexual activity, not sexual feelings. Let's be very clear about that. Nobody is saying, if you happen to be a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, okay, it's nobody is saying that you are sinning, quote unquote, because you have these sexual feelings. All right? But there are boundaries that are part of those religions that say, irrespective of your feelings, there are things that you can do and there are things that you cannot do. And it's not just in the area of sexuality, it's in a lot of different areas. So, you have millions upon millions of people who feel this way, who are slowly being purged from their industries, from their professions, etc., because they refuse and cannot. It's not just that they refuse; they cannot, in good conscience, say, "I think this behavior is fine." They can say it's none of my business, okay, but they can't say this behavior is fine and I'm going to celebrate it publicly. And more we're telling people they have to make that choice. It's divisive. It's disrespectful of people who are, other than that, tolerant, good, decent citizens who would be the very first to help somebody out, irrespective of their sexual orientation, that needed help. They give to charities, they volunteer, they do everything that you would expect a decent, charitable member of a community, upstanding member of a community to do. But when it comes to certain things with respect to sexual behavior, they'll say, I'm sorry, I can't endorse this. It doesn't mean that I think that you're a bad person. It's just that my religion, it's against my religious belief. It's against my religious practices.
And
So
the
for the NHL to then come along and say, we know that we have believing Christians who are playing hockey, well, a lot actually. Why in heaven's name would they provoke a confrontation, a division, conflict in their teams, in the dressing rooms over this issue? Okay, just leave people be. And
Yeah, I don't argue with that. The thing I think that happened was the NHL saw what the other major sports leagues were doing and wanted to play along, and were very surprised at the reaction they got when they tried to implement this, starting with Mr. Provorov. His jersey, just to give you an idea of some of the support that he got in Philadelphia, his jersey sold out in minutes. Because they sell souvenir jerseys.
right,
I've
of
got
course.
one here for John Tavares and things like that for the Leafs, but they just poof, they were gone because people liked the fact that he stood up and said, I'm not casting judgment or dispersions on anybody else, but just like you said, I just cannot condone this. I just cannot wear that jersey. It goes against what I believe in. Now, the other thing about this, and I really mean this, I really think that there's a groundswell that is surfacing within the NHL that is much wider, broader, and deeper. And this has been brought about by some of the most militaristic members of the LGB whatever it is community, and there's some very militaristic type people, that are involved in that particular group. They're not. It's not unique to them, but they certainly are there, and they are the ones spoiling for a fight. And people basically said, "We're done. We don't want to have this conversation anymore. We don't want to hear about it anymore. They've overplayed their hand, and now they're reaping the rewards."
Okay, let's take a quick break. 30-second commercial. Don't go away. We'll be back in 30 seconds.
Who says you can't turn the clock back? Experience the excitement of open air flying and see Canada's national capital region like you've never seen it before from the open cockpit of a vintage 1930s biplane. Are you up for the adventure? Put on your helmet and goggles and strap yourself in. Book your flight today. Go to OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. That's OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. Ottawa Biplane Adventures. The adventure begins here.
Oh my gosh, that was so exciting! I gotta do it again.
We're
I
back.
heard she's got to do it again.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nick, getting back to this whole discussion, there's a very, very serious, very important religious freedom component to this. It's you have to allow people, I as a practicing, believing Jew, committed Jew, if I want to play hockey and I make it to the NHL or whatever, essentially, and we're using the NHL as the whipping boy here, okay? But it could be, I could be working for the Royal Bank, and they tell me I have to wear a rainbow armband, and if I don't wear a rainbow armband, I'm putting my job in jeopardy. And I'm going, well, I don't understand. I treat every one of my customers with the utmost respect. I don't ask them. I don't care what their sexual orientation is. It's not for me to judge. It's not for me to know one way or the other. I don't know why anybody feels that they have to come in, sit down in front of me and say I'm gay or I'm transgender or whatever. It's not my business. I don't know. I don't care. I just know what my religious obligations are. And then to be told, and by the way, I'm just using hypothetically the Royal Bank, but it could be any other
Any
institution,
any organization. Yeah.
okay, to be told, well, sorry, you cannot practice, you cannot adhere to your religious convictions while you're at work. Well, how is that even possible? And how is it possible, I dare I ask this question, how is it even possible that we've reached a point in time in our society where we even have to ask that question? It's, live and let live means live and let live. And here's some, news flash. We tolerate the things that we disagree with. So, are you asking for me to agree? Or are you asking for me to tolerate even though I disagree? Well, you're going to have a lot of problems trying to create a society where everybody agrees on everything, and I think that that's a dangerous situation to be in because there's no end to the kinds of things that we are going to disagree on, and a lot of them are going to be far more fundamental than somebody's sexual practices. Okay. So we don't want to have a conforming, one-dimensional society where everybody just is marching along in lockstep with one another. Okay, there's a term for that. That's what they did in Nazi Germany. Okay, now I hesitate to inject that terminology into this discussion, but do you really, really want to have a society where there's somebody, whether it's Big Brother or it's the government or whomever, okay, says this is the right way of thinking on this issue, and you damn well better conform to it. Everybody get into line behind. Well, guys, that's not the kind of society you want. Trust me. It's been tried, and it's been, frankly, disastrous. Not just disastrous, but murderously disastrous.
Yes.
For the world let alone the society, people who are living within that society. So human beings, humanity, human relations is messy, and we have to accept the fact that it's messy. Not everybody thinks the same way, and so you tolerate differences of opinion until such a time as the actions of one group or another, or one individual or another, irrespective of what side they are on any controversial issue, when they go beyond a difference of opinion and they incite violence or participate in violent behavior themselves, that's where you draw the line. And I draw that line. I draw that line absolutely when it comes to people who are against the what I'll call the gay revolution, for want of a better term to use. Nobody should judge me because I've used that term. But I'll tell you what, if somebody like in Nashville last week, who happens to be transgendered, picks up a rifle and goes to a Christian school and murders 6 people, 3 of whom are children under 9 years old,
Right.
okay, I will call them out as well. I'll call out the Timothy McVeighs of the world, and I'll call out the people who maybe are on the other side of the equation. It's
You
the
know,
behavior that's wrong, and that kind of extremist behavior is wrong, and you're not going to eliminate it by trying to control people's thinking.
well, looping back to what you had said about institutions and how institutions are trying to get people to conform, regardless of what institution it is. There's churches out there. There's, manufacturers out there. There's obviously sporting leagues that are out there, all beating on this drum. And when I said there's a groundswell, you're making my point. It's surfaced within the NHL, but it's there all across society. That's why you see parents now going to board meetings in ways they didn't do 10 years ago. When was the last time? Think back on it. Over the last 10 years, how many times did parents go in and tear apart a school board trustee or a group of trustees over an
Figuratively
issue that wasn't?
speaking.
Yes, psychologically, yeah, philosophically speaking here. We're not talking about physical, but they go in and they just, they go after them. Uh, Other than some of the books that are being allowed, some of the events that are being allowed in school now, outside of that, when did it ever happen? The answer is almost never. And if it did, you certainly didn't hear about it in the news. But now it's happening more and more often because people have hit that wall and they're sick to death of it. And this is where I mean that the let's call it the woke crowd has hit a wall, and they are to themselves still relevant, but to a growing number of people in society, these people are just not to be listened to. Don't pay them any attention. Don't don't allow them to run roughshod over you with the meek response. It's more and more. And what it comes down to is when somebody is perceived to be attacking your child. This is why it's different in this case than it is, say, at a truckers' protest. When someone's attacking your child, you respond like a mother bear, especially ladies. When they feel their children are threatened in any capacity, they are going to come at you like a roaring lion. And it's all based around this particular issue because people understand children are innocent. They're born innocent. And the world will strip them of that innocence soon enough. They don't need to have it force-fed to them at 6 years old.
Yeah, and there again, unfortunately, the extremism on this particular question emanating from the woke crowd is preventing us from having important discussions about policy. We should if somebody has the gender expression, is when they're doing their gender expression, that they're a man but they feel like a woman, automatically they should have access to women's change rooms, etc. And we experienced that on a personal level recently here in Ottawa with members of my family. And I'm thinking to myself, at the particular case, it could just as easily have been my younger granddaughter who was exposed to this particular man in a change room at a public swimming pool. And what I want to know is, has anybody thought about the trauma that young girls who are finding themselves in this situation are going to be experiencing as a consequence of what I think is a very selfish demand on the part of people who feel okay that they want to transition. Well, I'm not standing in anybody's way, but don't trample on the rights of people who are uncomfortable with that. Be a little bit more sympathetic. You know what it is? It's like going back to when we started the show tonight, Nick, when we were talking about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
80 million people voted for Donald Trump. Whatever you think of the man, whatever you think about the policies and the issues and things like that, don't thumb your nose at these people. They're decent people who just disagree with you. Okay, they're not bad people. There's a disagreement here, and it's what drives me crazy is this dismissive attitude that we get from people on the other side of the equation, whether it's politics or social policy, etc. And so, it's a valid question to ask. Should we be having trans reading sessions in elementary schools? And it's, some people will say yes, some people will say no, but the problem that I have is that we're not even allowed to ask the question without being branded as being extremist,
Transphobic.
racist, homophobic, transphobic, whatever you want to do, misogynist,
It's funny that whenever, especially today, whenever you come up against the woke crowd, they invent a new phobia. I mean, who'd ever even heard the word transphobic 5 years ago? Nobody.
I don't even know
And
what it
first, homophobic was, I think, one of the first ones they pulled up with. And the whole term itself, phobic means phobia, which means fear. And so to understand the term correctly, to be homophobic means you are afraid of gay people. Nothing could be further from the truth. First, they don't understand how to use the language. And then people will say, well, you're just a homophobe, therefore you're full of hate. How can you be full of fear and hate at the same time? Those are two diametrically opposed emotions.
Well, I don't know.
It's just
I don't know, Nick. I just know it's it's very unhealthy for our democracies, plural, to essentially say we're not allowed to talk about policy because it makes people uncomfortable.
Well, what's the next subject to come along that we can't talk about now?
Well, that's my point.
Yes, that I'm just underlining it. If that's the case, and by the way, I am not homophobic. I couldn't care less. If somebody wants to, I echo you. What they do behind closed doors is none of my affair, and I don't care, and I don't want to know. And there's nothing. I'm not full of anger about it, and I certainly am not afraid of them.
Okay.
Just to set the record straight.
Watching the clock here, Nick. Let me take a second while we've got all kinds of people watching the show, participating,
Sure.
etc., to give a quick plug for the Joseph Benamy Show Monday to Thursday. You can check it out on go to the website josephbenamy.com, all one word without the hyphen, or you can check the Joseph Benamy Show on YouTube or on Facebook or whatever. But check me out, check it out, and that's my plug for the Joseph Benamy Show. 8:00.
All right.
Thursday,
And
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
I must congratulate you on your dissertation about this Trump case. and the district attorney and how the two systems are different. If anybody wants to really understand what's going on, listen to Joseph on that. That
On the
was just
podcast.
on the podcast. I listened to it and it was excellent.
Well, I
Anyway,
appreciate the plug.
with that said, I think it's time for us to put this particular episode to bed. So for Joseph and myself, I want to wish you all a great week. We'll see you all again next Sunday night at 8 p.m. Until then, ubiqueritas et amor, Deus ibi est. Good evening, God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace, and may you have a fair wind and a following sea.